Then go ahead.
Hi, my name is, well, most people just call me Medlar, and because I'm never just one, they call us the Medlars. Right, everybody? Yes!
Okay, now wait, everybody. I thought we agreed that only one Medlar was going to speak at a time because it's kind of hard to hear. You talk in such a high voice.
I know, Rhea. And there's a reason behind that. We're going to be talking about that, aren't we?
Yes, we are, but only one at a time, okay?
Sorry. Now let's stick to the program, everybody.
You need to remind everybody what they are listening to.
And you are listening to Cider Chat, and this is episode 134.
And away we go. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Wincaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks from the cider trade all around the world. And sometimes we also have talking pommes. You heard the Medlars bringing us into this podcast this week, and we will be speaking about what a Medlar is. And you also heard from Mr. Quince, who always keeps us on task. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit from Perry Pear. No doubt about that. We're also going to be listening to a behind-the-scene recording that was held at the Big E Cider Competition for the Best in Show. We're going to come right up with all that and more in this edition of a Cider Chat, episode 134. This podcast gets on the air each week with a bit of help from the patrons of Cider Chat. You too can become a patron. Just Google Patreon. That's spelled Patreon. Next week, we're going to have one of the grand poobahs of the Patreon page, the first cidery to join the commercial cider going up campaign at the Cider Chat Patreon page. And that is Current Cider, because they just opened their Fishtown location. So next week, my plan is to have a pre-recorded episode where Joe Getz, the cider maker of Current, and I are speaking about Viejo, this barrel-aged cider, and talking a bit about the Fishtown location that they opened in downtown Philadelphia. Well, it's not downtown, it's Fishtown. But I think you get my drift, and that's going to be really fun. Current Cider has been working on this project for a while, so I'm really excited to bring to you a bit of what you could expect if you go there in terms of their cider, and a little update with Joe. So stay tuned for that next week. And if you're new to this podcast, you get a sense of what it's about. It's a weekly episode where we're talking to all different kinds of folks all over the universe. And the focus is all about apples, pears, cider, what you could do in the orchard. There's just so many topics to cover. And we have a full list of folks coming up in the subsequent episodes all over the block. And right now we are approaching into July, which is probably a traveling time for many folks out there. So you're traveling and hopefully stopping along the way and checking out what cider you can find locally, because there's nothing better than drinking a cider at the location where it has been made. Oftentimes you get to speak with the maker, check out what they're doing, if there's an orchard or not. Just get a sense of what is happening with that cider. I think there's so much education for all of us, myself included, somebody who's been involved in cider for a while. I'm constantly being educated on terminology, methodology for making cider, and the behind-the-scenes scoops on that. So wherever you travel during these summer months, I hope that it is really restful and you get to delve in to a full glass of cider and kind of sit on that. I mean, there's gulping times for sure when it's really hot out. I will confess I have done that. But there's also good times to just sip and savor and focus over that cider. In fact, that's what Joe and I are going to be doing next week with the Viejo cider that he made in a barrel. Speaking of barrels, there's been a number of very interesting episodes from my perspective. So I know since I'm a super geek, maybe you might not feel the same way, but who doesn't love a barrel? I mean, it's just the way it looks. You just want to hug it. Often the wood, when it's filled, it has this kind of like soft wetness to it too. Anyways, episode 131 is cider barrels with a Cooper, Maker, and Thierry. And then there is episode 132, which was barrels and batonnage. Both those episodes were recorded recently up in Ontario, Canada, while I was traveling about with Ryan Monkman of Fieldbird Cider, who is also helping sponsor this podcast via that trip. So very, very interesting. And then last week's episode was called Cider's Chemical Fingerprints. And there's a video and an audio section. So you could watch the full video of that podcast recording with the presenter, John Edwards, showing you everything on the PowerPoint. I was following along. I think it came out very well. And then there's also an actual podcast where you could just listen, because sometimes you just want to listen and not have to look. And I absolutely get that. So good stuff going on. And going back to that thought about tasting locally, like going to the current cider in Fishtown and tasting the cider right there, probably seeing Joe somewhere in the room, you get a certain sense of the smell of the area, the way the color is in the sky, because it's different from one part of the universe to the other. It could be different from one side of the hill to the other side. And as the land changes, so does the agriculture and the people and the smells and earth and minerals that go with that. And that's why I like traveling and tasting cider as I can. And I've been lucky enough to do that. And of course, you probably have heard, perhaps, that I am leading a tour to Normandy, France coming up. And one of the reasons I like to do that, as soon as I land in the Charles de Gaulle airport, which is right outside of Paris, and I step out and I just smell the air is different. And then traveling out to Normandy where we go, the colors of the trees, it's like a different type of green. I mean, it's all similar, of course, but you know that you are in a different, unique landscape. And you hear the French being spoken, and you have a croissant that just breaks in your hand in that perfect way that a croissant should, as one would expect being in France, right? And then a nice cup of joe or coffee. Boy, those kind of textures of taste that just lay against your tongue and really bring you into a landscape. There's just nothing like that. You just never forget it. You never forget the taste. In fact, like traveling to Joe was point in case. Being there and sipping it where it was made just blew it out of the water. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about Medlars. So stay tuned for that. The thing about Medlars, until you know about them, you don't really notice them. I mean, you might be passing by a Medlar tree or bush somewhere out there in Ciderville and have absolutely no idea that beautiful bush or tree is a Medlar until you know what a Medlar is. So we decided, myself and the Talking Pommes, to share with you a little bit about what a medlar is, to have an understanding of that, so that you might be inclined to, one, try a medlar, and maybe even plant a medlar. The trees or bushes themselves, they could grow in different heights, don't necessarily live a long time, although I've seen some pretty old medlar trees. Interestingly, for me, the medlar trees that I have seen have been out of the country where I live, and I can't necessarily import them in. So I haven't had the opportunity to blet a medlar myself. And that might be sounding, what is she talking about? But that's the history behind a medlar, is that, or the story behind a medlar, is they need to be blet, which is a story in and of itself. So let's first begin there and talk a little bit about what is a medlar. And a medlar is what?
A medlar is a pomme. The fruit is a pomme. And you normally pick us in the late fall. And it's in the middle of the winter that we can be eaten.
That's right. So you are picked late in the fall, and if you pick them then, it'd be hard and you wouldn't want to eat them at all. But once a medlar goes to the point where we call it, they take sweetness to what we call the precipice of fruitland rottenata, or on the very edge of being rotten, essentially. And the medlars will become kind of like, almost just like a very delicate, like puffball mushroom on the outside. Like if you squeeze it, it's going to squish. And it's at that point where it's just on that precipice of being rotten, or what we call fruitland rottenata. You could peel off the skin. In fact, the outer skin of the medlar will change colors as it gets to that closer precipice of going all the way over. It's at that point that you could peel off the skin, and it comes off fairly easily. There's a tiny little tail at the end. It's often like green. You could pull that out, eat it with a spoon, or just kind of like nibble on it or pop it in your mouth. So one end has a little tail that's like attached to the tree, and the other looks a little bit like a lamprey eel.
I know, and people have a very awful name for us.
Yes, that is true. And that's a little bit why we think that you deserve a high voice, because something that's been picked on for so many years deserves to have a voice that is absolutely sweet. Because you are a very sweet pomme, but we should probably tell people that a lot of folks kind of think that the medlar looks a little bit like cul de chien, shall we say, in French, which means in English a dog's arse. It's like, it looks like an anus with little tentacles coming out. That's how some people see it who aren't really informed or have never really appreciated a medlar like we do. Yes, indeed we do, Rhea. In fact, the medlars are one of my best friends.
And if anybody makes fun of a medlar when I'm around, they'll be thinking twice about how they're going to be getting out of that orchard.
Okay, Pops, okay. I know that you love the medlars, but it's true. There was a poem by the poet D.H. Lawrence, and he described medlars as autumnal excrementa. Not very nice. It's been the brunt of jokes from Shakespeare to poets. Go figure. But let's talk not so much about that, because it's easy to make fun of medlars.
I don't think it's very easy or fun at all to make fun of medlars.
I didn't mean it like that, Mr. Quince. I think you know what I'm talking about. People have taken it to, not the best way. But we're going to move on from that. Let's talk about where medlars came from. Perry, what do you have there?
Well, Rhea, thank you for asking. They came from Persia, which is also known as Iran, and from out in that area.
And Perry, who were eating and growing, cultivating medlars way back when?
The Greeks and the Romans had medlars. It is likely that they also had medlars in Bath, England, since those baths used in Bath had Romans bathing.
Okay, moving on.
Let's talk about Medlar varieties and what we look like.
The flower blossoms are white.
Mm-hmm.
I mainly know medlar trees, but I have met a couple bushes.
Agreed.
We have the Royals and Breda family of medlars here at Mount Mineral Orchard.
Yeah, no Hollands, Nottinghams, or Russians in our spot of Ciderville.
And we make a very fine jelly and pudding. Kind of like a lemon curd.
Yeah, there's a lot you could do with medlars, including, because they're pommes, you can make cider out of them. Again, I want to say I've never actually had a chance to eat a medlar, nor make cider out of a medlar. But sometime I expect, probably even in the near future, that's going to happen.
I sure hope so, Rhea, because I gotta think we're very special pommes.
You certainly are, and I think that's enough for this week. What do you say? Does it feel good to kind of get that out there and let everybody know what's up with medlars?
I'm feeling really good.
Okay, let's move on then.
All right. Well, we're going to next move on to the best in show in cider. A few weeks ago, I was a judge at the Big E cider competition. Now, the Big E, the full name is Eastern States Exposition, and that covers all the New England states in this region. So that's Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. And it also is open to New York State, too, which isn't really technically part of New England, but who doesn't love New York? So this fair has been taking place for quite a while, but the cider competition is pretty recent. It's 3 years in the running. The wine segment, so they do both cider and wine, has been going for 13 years. They asked myself and the following judges to attend. It was Charlie Ochowski, who's a founding member of Cider Days, Mark Griska, who is the Cider Days competition director. Both those guys I traveled with recently to Glencap, and you had us talking about on a Cider Chat Live episode about the competition Glencap and judging there. We also had in presence April Woodard, who is part of the new cidery called Wild Child Cellars, that's in Montague, and also Kurt Shear, who is the owner of Millstone Cellars down in Maryland, and who's been on this podcast. I think that was episode number 20, and he's also part of Wild Child Cellars. So that's a very exciting venture, and there is a blog post on Wild Child Cellars. You could check that out on the show notes for this here episode. We also had someone from Pennsylvania, and that was Emily Kovich. She's the editor of Cider Culture, which is an online cider publication, and works with Mary Bingham. I mentioned Mary last week, and I didn't really give her full credit. Mary Bingham runs the Town Dish and Cider Culture, and has brought together just a wonderful group of people. So Emily came up with her family. They were able to camp out on the grounds of the Big E fair scene because the Morgan Horse competition was taking place. There was a lot of people camping out. It's a really active fairground site, which I just adore because it speaks all about the association with agriculture, farming, farm animals, and really celebrating that and showcasing good quality practices. And that's what it's about for the cider competition. And of course, I was a judge too. we were split up into 2 teams of 3. So I was judging with Mark Griska and April Woodard. And at the end, we were able to take all the ciders that were awarded gold medals and pick the best in show. And that's what you're going to be hearing. Now, I've judged for many years with Charlie Ochowski and Mark Griska, of course, too, being part of Cider Days. And the way we did it was a little different than the wine competition. With the wine competition at the Big E, the judges set up their forms, put in their numbers, and then the Big E does a calculation of numbers. Whenever I judge with Charlie, we do it in a different style where we take the gold medal winners, and if you can imagine here, you have a flight of, let's say you have 6 ciders that won all gold medals and are vying now for best in show. You take all the ciders, they come out at once, and I typically put them on a piece of like white paper and mark the numbers, because you don't know who made these ciders or anything other than what the maker might have sent to you and is coming forward. You have no idea of the brand. So you write the numbers down, and then in this team of judges, each judge, one at a time, we were calling it votes the cider off the island, but essentially is saying why the cider comes off, and then it gets narrowed down to one particular cider. And that's what you're going to be hearing here, each judge talking about why the cider is not going to go forward. And I like this style of judging because it's just not numerical. Yes, there is always a subjective factor in judging. It's really hard to get away from that. And I don't think it's such a bad thing either, especially if a judge's palate is vast enough that they've had enough quality ciders from all over the map to really give them a sense of that. Again, why I encourage anyone who wants to judge or is excited about cider to travel and to explore cider, not just something that you get from your favorite cider bar or cider store, but actually at the maker. It really adds to your palate and the experience and knowing what it tastes like when it's kind of fresh out of the barrel or freshly made or really conditioned to the perfection that maker wanted it to be. But that aside, these judges definitely have a good background. April has been teaching the cider making like 101 course at Cider Days ever since I passed the baton to her a couple of years ago. Emily writes for the Cider Culture, so that's a good piece there. She's deep into it. And of course, Kurt Shear is really involved, Charlie and Mark. You have a nice complement of judges. So I do think there's a certain value of talking about it. Probably a little bit of a sensitivity because I'm recording, but I'm really happy that the judges were into allowing me to record and just to give you a little bit of the sense of the flavor of that experience. Do know that we were in a huge arena, and so there's a bit of background noise, but you should be able to hear the conversation pretty darn well. So now let's go to that competition for the Big E cider competition held on June 9th and hear the judging around the Best in Show for cider. And we have these 5 ciders. First one is with a Redfield, Ashmead Kernel, and a Mac. The second one has a Honeycrisp, Macintosh, and Delicious. And the other one just says locally sourced from New York State apples. And the fourth one is Apple, Macintosh, Baldwin, Cortland, and Gala blend. And then the last one is Hibiscus Flower and Fresh Mint. So surprisingly, that one really had some beautiful overtures in the flavor. We'll see what the rest of the judges feel about that one coming up. I have all the judges going around first here. I'll speak about one particular cider at a time. So the first one's going to go to April. We're going to see what she's going to say about this cider.
Yes, I would elect to vote 443 off of the island.
You want to say more about why?
Yeah, why?
Just in comparison to the rest of the ciders, I think they're all pretty solid. I guess I have other ciders on the list that I think have more of the characteristics for what I think is ideal in a cider.
Does anybody in the panel want to keep it on the table still?
Seeing if anybody else
Anyone
disagrees.
advocate for keeping it here?
Everybody's in agreement, so we're going to be moving forward.
I think the only detractor to that, because I thought it had some of the best aromas, at least as far as intensity.
It
Probably
does
in
have good aromas.
yeah, the
sure.
detractor is it might be just a little harsh in the finish.
It's harsh on the finish. That was where it lost me. But
Right.
I think that it does have some of the best aromas.
Yeah,
For
I mean it's
sure.
not my top.
Some
so.
of the best esters, but it looking at all the characteristics.
Right.
It had the most flowery perfumey
Yeah.
nose of the five.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, I felt that in the flavor profile, it was very one-dimensional. There was nothing of complexity to make it interesting cider. It lost my interest once I got past the nose.
Right.
It doesn't tell as much of a story as some of these other ciders do, I think, on the table.
And and maybe a victim of the choice of apples because it's 33% each of Honeycrisp, Macintosh, and Delicious, which are the stellar dessert apples that just don't add dimensions to a cider. They're dessert apples. You suffer the consequence.
And I guess the fact that the way we judge it is aromas get a lot fewer points than flavor. So if you're going to weight it on flavor, yeah, it's not going to show as well.
It's such an important element, though, can't be overlooked. The aromas.
Yeah, I know. I mean, for me, I would personally, I vote for aroma every time. But that's not what we're doing.
All
We
right.
have to drink it.
It's not my top three either. So
All right, so
Okay.
going clockwise motion. Are we going to take clockwise? Which one do you vote
So now we're going to hear from Mark, another judge in this competition. What will he vote off the island of cider for this station?
I like this cider, but
Which number are you referring to?
this is 411. 411, and once again, I think that it's interesting. It's got some great apple character in the nose and flavor. It's subtle. It's understated, which is one of the things I like about it. But I don't think, I guess, paired up with these other that are on the table, it's not nearly as bold. So it's not in my top three.
My adjective I use was uninteresting.
Uninteresting.
I feel like I need to move.
It has attributes, positive attributes, but it's the full package is uninteresting to me as a cider. So anyone who want to argue to keep it on the table? Having heard from no one, it is removed from the island. 411.
That's 411, correct?
We'll give it a good send-off.
Kurt, it's your turn.
To vote one off.
Yep.
Yeah, we're sort of getting down to the top three. And getting a little bit harder.
You have great
Colors.
math skill.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And I mean, I know what my number one is, and so I gotta. It's just the hibiscus flower fresh mint thing's just a little bit strange. It's really well made though.
Yeah.
I mean, all around but it's just a bit strange. So
This
No,
is what I said when we were tasting it.
Right.
It was that we had a lot of meaningful conversation around this because I agreed it was very well put together.
Yeah.
The complexities, the balances,
and the flavors go well together.
they do, but it was odd. But my fellow compatriots here really enjoyed it. I can see why. It's a difficult one to judge.
Yeah.
I'm a little sad about it because I actually like the hibiscus and the mint because I feel like despite that the mint is really kind of strong forward, I'm still getting the apple coming up in the back. And I find it surprised me as how much I enjoyed it as a like a herbal cider.
Well, it reminded me very much of like taking some of the celestial seasoning teas, like Red Zinger, and making it an iced tea for summer, drinking in a pitcher. Put a bunch of the tea bags in there, and then ice it down. But a long time ago, I was judging and beers, I believe, and the talk of the time was, do not ever make any kind of alcohol product with mint, especially beer, wine, cider, because it reminds the palate of a mouthwash. But to tell you the truth, this is the first time I've had a mint beverage like this where I really like this, and I could see this on an ice cube would be a very nice summer drink. But it's not my cup of tea, but it sort of works.
Well,
you know.
I agree with you, Charlie. But the thing that I liked about this is that you not only get the hibiscus in the nose, you get the apple as well as the mint, and both the balance of the hibiscus and mint. Granted, those are not cider things, but I thought those were really balanced nicely. Plus the balance with the cider itself. And then what I got that I really liked about this was in the finish, you get a little hint of mint right at the end, and it's kind of like like the little crash of the cymbal at the end of the song, and you get the apple character in there. So I thought it was really nicely made.
Definitely nicely made, no doubt about it.
It is, but where is it in terms of cider? And that's the struggle, isn't it?
I think it's a modern cider. I mean, that's where it's
It's
kind
a
of like.
category of using spicing and non-traditional ingredients. So it fits in here, but is it going to be the best example of what we've judged in this event today? And that's why you put it forth, because in a way it's the easiest one to get rid of. Then again, it's hard to, because it does have some positive character.
And from a technical standpoint, it's, as we saw with the spice ciders that we tried, that were so overblown, so unenjoyable. Like, it does seem like it takes a lot of technical prowess to handle 3 such different tonalities and make them harmonize and make sure the apple isn't lost.
Yeah.
But I also don't know how much to reward something just because it's surprising that it can be good. You know, like,
Right on those merits.
There's no question that this person made small batches of this to get the right proportions to make it work right, because as Mark pointed out, there's a nice balance struck there, and all the personality of the thing survives and works together. But I guess looking at what remains, I'm going along with Kurt too. I want to say goodbye to it reluctantly, I guess.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I agree in that we have these 3 here up against each other. And so in this particular grouping, I would also remove this from the list, although I think it is remarkably technically good, and I take my hat off to that. But my favorite is still here on the table.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I'm sad to see it go. I just want to say, for the 2 cents, sometimes I think we stay in a certain kind of path around cider, and cider in America now is like taking multiple paths. And I think the hibiscus and mint is like a classic example of like the greatness of that American style, which goes way out of the box and is able to do both that herbal delight there and still hold the apple. However, since I'm recording, I will step away from my own critique there. And I don't like Bigelow tea. I'm not a big red zinger person.
You know, I really feel like we had some other ciders today, though, that really felt more like flavored cider. This doesn't scream flavored cider. It is more nuanced. It is more cared for than those genre of cider. So I applaud it for that.
You know, actually, to make it a worldly type of beverage, I think hibiscus is sourced usually in Egypt, isn't it? That's the main place where they get it from. You know? So an Egyptian flower, New England mint, and New England apples meeting in a glass.
Hello, right? I know, that alone is
International
pretty amazing.
cider.
So we'll give it a nice mention there.
So, Emily, it's your turn.
well,
Crucial vote here.
yeah.
It's down to 2 ciders, and it's up to Emily to see which one's going to go next.
I really like them both. I do feel like, to me, 426 was a little less dynamic, a little bit less exciting in its complexity, and a little bit more thin start to finish. Being picky, being you know, that like that's only comparing the two. That's the one I think I would axe, but I'm open to debate.
Sure, you're looking to remove which one?
426.
So just for your recording reel, you should tell people that that's a French cider.
That's a French cider,
Made
right?
From Macintosh, Baldwin, Cortland, and Gala.
Right. So a French cider made from like not typical French cider varieties. It was also we consider it maybe being bottle conditioned at very small, tiny bubbles. I'm not sure if we're getting that right now.
There's also none of those style qualities listed on the spreadsheet. We're just supposed to judge it based on first impressions, right? I didn't try this before either, so. But that's still my pick.
Do we have anyone in the panel that's defend the integrity of 426 to keep it on the table?
Well, what we're doing is we're saying that we're then picking 450 as the number one.
Well, unless you disagree, then we need someone to advocate for 426 at this point.
Well, you also would have the last vote, so maybe
I do.
I think so. I mean, not think.
It's down to
Now
two
it's open to
ciders.
everybody in the panel because you made this presentment. So, and does anyone want to defend 426?
No, I just say once again, for the sake of your recording, you should tell people that the 450 is common cider made from Redfield, Ashmead's Kernel, and Macintosh.
So the Redfield would be kind of like that classic cider apple that's now being used in the U.S. I wonder if that, you know, seeing the name of that apple up there, if that was like when you saw that, well, obviously that should be like the top pick because of the actual apple. Does that, if you hadn't seen Redfield there, would that have changed your?
The way I look at these two is they're both almost equal, but one is sort of an entry level cider, and the other one's a little bit more for, you know, the discerning cider drinker. And so, which one are we going to reward? You know, the entry level, or they're both, they're both very good.
You know, I've had ciders that have been made with Redfield as part of the profile, and most of the time it's there. The Redfield is over the top with its tannin quality, and it made it very, very difficult to find good balance on your palate. But this time, even though they use 95% of Redfields to make this cider, it doesn't have that effect on my palate. And it used the other two apples that it used to give it, like the Mac probably for aromatic expression, and the Ashmead's Kernel to give it some depth of flavor. And it works really, really well to make it. It was my favorite cider of the five, and so that I'm not opposed to removing 426. But there's a nice job with the Redfield. It's such a high percentage.
And it's also a beautiful cider.
You know.
It is the color.
Beautiful, like a little light kind of. What would you say? Like almost.
It's like an apricot blush. It's gorgeous. This was my favorite cider of the day today.
So we have some
Personally,
happy judges here who have just picked
glad
the
it came
Best in
up.
Show at the Big E Northeast Gold Cider and Perry competition for 2018. And the cider that was awarded Best in Show at the Big E is the Redfield cider that was made by West County Cider based in Coleraine, Massachusetts. And of course, West County is the first cidery to be the commercial cidery in the U.S. post-Prohibition. So that's a nice feather in the cap there, and that is the maker Field Maloney, who is also part of Cider Days. There were a lot of good ciders there, albeit a small number, and something that you should know if you're a maker or someone just traveling through at the Big E, there's going to be a location during the fair. It takes place the second week after Labor Day, and it goes almost for like 2 weeks. And anyone who won a medal at this competition is going to be able to sell their wares, their product, their cider, during the Big E. And just think about this for a minute. Almost like 1.8 million people go through the Big E. That is a huge amount of people to be able to present your cider to. Not all of them are going to be drinking cider. There's a lot of things to do at this fair and a lot of reasons why people go. But what a great opportunity for cideries to be able to enter into this competition. And then as a result, the award winners get to have their ciders actually sold on site. And the Big E, the folks who run it, they do all the background work doing the sales. So it's a great opportunity. It was a really nice experience for me. And next year they'll be having the 4th annual competition. And I expect it's going to be bigger and better. And I hope that you enjoy this little bit of behind the scenes of what actually happens during a judging. You know, everybody's kind of talking about it and setting forth what they see as the best cider. And having had experience in this for a while, you know really by the end of that competition, when you taste a cider that stands out, I mean, it cuts through your palate. Even if you've been drinking like 50 ciders that day, it cuts through like nothing else. And that Redfield really did. It was well done. I think all those ciders are award-winning just by virtue of being made and being delivered to a competition, which is no small task. So kudos to all the makers. And I hope to see more in that Big E cider competition coming up next year. Look for the links and the info on the Big E in the show notes to this here episode 134. I'm going to roll out of here right now because I have a meeting to get to for Cider Days coming up the first weekend of November. It's the 24th annual year, and I am on the board. So I got to get ready for that meeting and get this podcast out for you. I hope you have a good week out there. It is coming in on July, wherever you are out in the world, whether it's the Southern Hemisphere, happy midwinter, or if you are where I am in the Northern Hemisphere, hot dang, it's summertime. Enjoy it. This is Rhea Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Yeehaw!